Today we're diving into a really cool field test. It puts two types of agricultural drones head-to-head to figure out a simple question. Which one is safer for the environment? But the answer was anything but simple. In fact, the results were not what anyone saw coming. Let's get into it.
So if you haven't noticed, farming is going seriously high-tech. We're talking about a full-on technological revolution, from tractors that steer themselves with GPS to irrigation systems that run on their own. And one of the most visible new tools out there? It's the drone. Specifically, the ones built to spray crops. And for this story, we're zooming in on a study that focused on two really popular models, the DJI Agris T30 and its sibling, the T25. Now, they might look pretty similar, but they actually have two totally different ideas about the best way to get spray from the drone down onto the plants. Okay, so whenever you have new tech like this, especially something that flies, the big question is always about safety. And the number one concern here is a problem called spray drift. So what is spray drift? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when those tiny chemical droplets drift away and end up where they shouldn't be, on a neighbor's field, in a river, or affecting local wildlife. It is a really serious issue, and it's exactly why this kind of technology is so tightly regulated.
All right, let's get to the heart of this comparison, because this is where things get interesting. The key difference between these two drones comes down to the nozzles. That's the little part that actually turns the liquid into a spray. So on one side, you've got the Agris T30. It uses what are called air induction nozzles, or AINs. This is the old-school industry standard tech. Think of it like a shower head. It creates bigger, coarser droplets and sprays them straight down. On the other side is the Agris T25, with its newer rotary atomizers, or RATs. These are totally different. They use a spinning disc to fling out a much finer mist, kind of like a lawn sprinkler.
Now, based on how they work, and on earlier tests done in wind tunnels, the scientific assumption was pretty clear that finer mist from the newer rotary atomizers had to be more likely to drift away on the wind, right? The conventional wisdom was that this new tech was just inherently riskier.
But here's the thing about assumptions. They aren't facts. So to find out what really happens out in the field, with real wind, researchers at Germany's famous Julius Kühn Institute set up an incredibly rigorous experiment following super strict international standards to measure spray drift for real.
So here's how they did it. First, they laid out rows and rows of petri dishes downwind to act as collectors. Then they flew the drones on these precise, pre-programmed paths. Instead of pesticides, they sprayed a harmless fluorescent dye that's super easy to measure. This wasn't about guesswork, this was about generating hard, undeniable data.
And just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about here, the team used over 2,400 of these petri dishes to capture every last drop of data from all the different flights. They were absolutely determined to get this right.
So, after all those flights and analyzing all those samples, the results finally came in. And well, they were not what the conventional wisdom predicted. Not at all.
Let's just put ourselves in a real-world scenario for a second. Imagine a drone flying at a pretty standard height, say 2 meters, at a moderate speed. Which system do you think was safer? The old trusted standard or the new Challenger?
Well, take a look at this. This is what's so fascinating. The newer rotary atomizer system, the one everyone assumed was the riskier one, actually produced less drift than the traditional system. Now, the difference isn't massive, but it completely flips that old assumption on its head.
This was a huge finding. It basically suggested that maybe the technology itself wasn't the simple hero or villain of the story, which leads to a much bigger question. If it's not just about the nozzle, then what really determines the risk? So the researchers dug even deeper into their data. They started comparing not just the nozzles, but how they performed under different flight conditions, specifically at different heights and different speeds.
And this is where the story gets really nuanced. Check out this table. Under those practical low and slow settings, you can see the rat nozzle is actually a little bit better. But look what happens when they push the drones into more extreme settings, flying higher and faster. The drift from both systems goes way up, and now suddenly the rat nozzle is actually producing slightly more drift.
This led the scientists to a really powerful conclusion. The single most important factor wasn't the type of nozzle on the drone at all. It was the choices made by the person flying it, how high and how fast they decided to go.
And that brings us to the final, and I think most crucial lesson from this whole experiment. It's a lesson that honestly applies to way more than just drones in a field. See, the real risk isn't from one piece of hardware. It's from a combination of things. Flying higher is riskier. Flying faster is riskier. And all these factors together create what the scientists call a safe operating window. So the key to safety isn't just about picking one nozzle over the other. It's about making sure the pilot stays inside that window, no matter what hardware they're using.
You know, we spend so much time arguing about whether a new technology is inherently good or bad, but what this study really shows is that a supposedly risky tool, if you use it correctly, can be perfectly safe. And a safe tool, if you use it recklessly, can be really dangerous. It's the human element, the rules, the training, the choices we make that truly matters.
And that kind of leaves us with a final, bigger thought. In an age of AI, self-driving cars, and, farming drones, maybe the most important work we have to do isn't just inventing the next new tool, but very carefully deciding how we, as humans, are going to choose to use it.